Welcome to the Explorers Podcast with Ken Bowen. Here, Ken connects with friends and peers to discuss issues in the world and practices to improve one's biblical perspective.
I'm thankful for your joining us, though, as we have this Explorers podcast, and I just enjoy chatting with people from various parts of my life and part of the journey. And I think one of the things that you and I particularly share in common is the idea of storytelling and great narrative, and also about using storytelling in such a way that we use beauty that points beyond itself to truth and that to goodness. And so that whole idea of having an embedded in a narrative that makes real sense in the biblical framework. So that to me, and then using that as a backdoor to the Bible, as it were, as well. So all that.
Beauty, if we attend to it properly, always opens a door towards transcendence.
Yes.
And I think that's true. There's a great story where C.S. Lewis is talking in Surprised by Joy. The absence of beauty characterized his childhood. He had never seen a beautiful building, didn't believe that a building could be beautiful. I went all through his boyhood home 2 different times. It's one of the most stunning places I've ever seen. But he said, so what was that about? Because he was living in the midst of it. And he said the first beauty he ever encountered was when his brother brought a toy garden on the lid of a biscuit tin into the nursery. And he said, what all the real gardens failed to do to him, that garden did. So he's saying all the real gardens could have done it to him. That meant he recognized that there was beauty out there, but he hadn't awakened to it yet. Yes. In some senses, I think that God particularizes his imperious call to us through individual experience. So much does he love us individually that he gives this.
Yeah.
And most people I know have had experiences where they walk through an art museum and they passed hundreds and hundreds of paintings, but then all of a sudden one painting just reaches out and grabs them.
Yes.
They've seen many sunsets, but one particular sunset grabs them. And I think God is breaking through to them that they might then attend to him and his transcendence.
Yes, those are subtle and divine invitations that we are granted. But again, it's astonishing how many people fail to receive those hints and those wonders. But when those invitations occur, as you say, they're particularized. And they are inviting us to respond to that and resonate with that goodness that he's invited us to pursue.
I think that shows God's love for each of us as individuals. I remember, Ken, years ago, I read through the Bible once or twice every year.
Yes.
And one time I was reading through it and I thought, Lord, you're omniscient. You only gave us one book. You got libraries filled with books. You could have given us so much more. But I would get to Chronicles 1 through 12, and I would say, but Lord, 12 chapters of names, just names? Was that good? Was that good use of the space? Couldn't you have given us something else? And then it dawned on me in that moment, I think the Holy Spirit gives us these prompts. No, to me, they're just names, but to God, he was familiar with every one. And it's almost like he's saying, I want you to see here Sarah. Oh, how I loved her and how she struggled with her barrenness. I want you to see Simeon. I know he was cruel to his brother Joseph, but he was one of the unloved sons of Jacob. He had his story too. And each one of these people have stories that God is aware of, familiar with, and each one he loves. So when I read Chronicles 1 through 12, I tell myself, God loves people, not just people generally. He loves individual people.
Yes.
Each one, he gives these experiences that he might woo them to himself.
Yes. Yeah, this is a remarkable thought that he pursues us and loves us in all of our hopes and dreams and fears that we have, and he knows them through and through. And those obscure names to us mean everything to him. And so it's very difficult for me to get my arms around that and to realize that everything that he puts in this world, if I have the eyes to see and the ears to hear, can be pointers to his grace and having a vision for that. I sometimes call it the second naivete as well. In our first naivete, Can you hear me?
Yeah. I was just wondering what is second naivete?
Yeah.
What's the first?
So I
Second?
see the first naivete as childishness, and Paul says, "I've learned to put away childish things" in 1 Corinthians 13. But I think that few adults, though, when they put away childish things, why did we stop writing or creating or painting and drawing and imagining and playing? And something of us, if we're not careful, will die. And we need what I think is a second naivete, a childlikeness, a childlike wonder, a sense of awe, a sense of receptivity. One way I define the second naivete is the inability of being bored, the capacity to see beauty in every component of life. And I'm a scientist, and that's always been a huge component of my life, to see mystery in the microcosm and the biosphere and the macrocosm, and to see that everything that God has created is designed to point beyond itself to moral and spiritual truth for those who have the eyes to see and the ears to hear. So then being attuned to that, the more I see, the greater my acuity of vision will be. And I think that's something that Lewis describes as well in his wonderful descriptive expressions. As I'm reading through the Chronicles of Narnia again to my bride, and I'm in the last battle. And again, his descriptions of these places and locales are just absolutely so brilliant. And he had a way of seeing that he could convey that and transmit to others.
Chesterton said something similar to what you've just described. At the end of one of his essays, he says, "The world will never starve for want of wonders, only for want of wonder."
Yes.
And then he also says that God is never bored. Every time he gives us a sunset, he says the next day, "Do it again, encore, do it again."
Like a child, "Do it again, Daddy."
Yeah.
And he never get tired, because no two sunsets are ever identical. He never repeats himself. He always has boundless and infinite creativity that I find. And it's one of the ways I try to define heaven: endless creative activity without frustration to the glory of God. But
there is a generalization you can make, though. If somebody walked into your door right now, into your office, and you had never seen them before, and somebody said to you, "Where's that person's face?" you'd have no problem pointing to their face, even though you'd never seen it before.
That's right.
We've got the particular, but we've also got the abstraction. You can abstract from the particulars, and you have a general idea of certain things, and that's also wonderful too. It's both and. It's not an either or.
No, we have this extraordinary capacity to, and I think I'm more and more of a both and person. There's a whole idea of respiration between these components that go back and forth, and that there's a reciprocal relationship, a kind of a homeostasis that we see of goods that are involved in sustaining this extraordinary world. And it just becomes more, the more I see, the more I'm able to see, and that's true in any order. It's a kind of welcoming people to wonder and seeing it through those eyes. It's remarkable.
In light of that, then every place where we cast our eyes, if we look at it properly, is a call to worship.
That's correct. And that's how I see it. Is these are invitations to worship and to wonder, and I think most of them are declined. I think we increase our capacity as we respond obediently. And so as he invites me to obey what he calls me to do, and here's an invitation, here's a thing, being attuned to the quiet prompts of the Spirit of God. I think as I respond to that, it amplifies the experience and makes the next one more, I have a greater capacity to receive it and respond to it. I think obedience is a portal of divine disclosure. The more you obey him, the more he'll reveal himself.
Yeah, I think that's true. The obedience leads to spiritual girth. Remember when the disciples said, "Lord, increase our faith"?
Yeah.
And Jesus tells a parable about obedience. And I don't know very much. I'm a pea brain. But I do know this, that every act of obedience allows me to respond to the omniscient command of God. And every time I respond well, I live in the benefits of omniscience. I can live beyond my own capacities.
That is,
So,
yes, that's a wonderful way of seeing it, because effectively you have to be omniscient to know your best interests, and only God has our best interests at heart. I have the illusion that I know what's best, but only God knows what's best. And so those are two illusions that all of us have to give up. One is the illusion of control. We don't control anything. And the second is the illusion that we know what's best. And so we then try to barter and argue and covenant with God on our terms, to make deals with God. Because obviously this is what my best interests look like. So it's his boundless patience with us and his love for us is so evident in the fact that we are so often recalcitrant.
and I think in light of that too, as we turn away from him, as you described, we actually turn our back on that which is to our best.
Yes.
And God has to allow us the opportunity to see this thing evaporate in front of us once we've grabbed it, because it's not going to fulfill us. And there's something about this too. Chesterton writes about obedience. We were talking about obedience as being something like a fence. So if I look outside the fence at what I long to get to, I don't see that stuff will do me harm. So the fence protects me from that which is harmful.
Yes.
Instead of bemoaning that, if I turn my back to the fence, I see how the fence describes the playground in which God wants me to enjoy life.
Yes.
So the acts of obedience both protect and provide.
They protect and provide, and they are prescient. They reveal what is indeed best for us. And as we live into those moments, we become expanded in our soul, because we learn to trust him, because we're building a sacred history. I tell people I've never, ever regretted an act of obedience. I've often resisted them, but I have never regretted one. But I've always consistently come to regret acts of disobedience. It ought to be a no-brainer then today, but yet I could very well shoot myself in the foot. How is that possible?
Yeah. That's very good.
Yeah,
Very good.
it's a funny way of seeing that, though. This whole realm of possibility and narrative that God has embedded us in this, as we've said before, this grand story. I wanted to ask you a question as I'm reading through the Chronicles, because the some will say that, well, perhaps you should start with the magician's nephew, because after all, that's the creation account. And it struck me, and I wanted to see if this made sense to you, that Lewis, as I'm reading again through the Narniad, I find that there's a coherent, consistent story that has a beginning, a middle, and an end. He has a clear 4-act story. It's a consummation at the end as well. And that architecture was already in his head, like Mozart saw a symphony before he wrote it down. I think Lewis had that whole Narniad, its beginning and its end in his mind. So that if that's true, it would seem to be to follow the storyteller who knew the story and let him reveal it as he chose to reveal it. And it's interesting, he begins with the eucatastrophe of Narnia, in The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, but then ends with the great battle. So does that make sense to you, or that sequence?
I don't think the order should have been changed. I think it should have been preserved the way that Lewis wrote it.
That's my thinking.
When you and I came to faith, we didn't come to faith because somebody described to us the nature of creation or the consummation of history. We came to faith through the cross. We encountered Jesus of Calvary. Yes. And then we started to grow from there. So then we're ready to read these other things. And I would agree with you.
Yeah.
And the other thing too, when the children come to Narnia through the wardrobe, and they encounter the beavers, and the beavers talk to them about Aslan. They don't know who Aslan is, but as soon as they hear the name, they light up, they awaken with wonder, and so on. And if you begin with the magician's nephew, you take that away, because now you already know who Aslan is at creation, but you haven't had this wonder of the first encounter.
That first encounter, yes, hearing that name. And I think it makes complete sense, though, that he starts with the death, burial, resurrection, and so forth. And that's where the gospel begins. the unique story of another centered one who pursues us, woos us. It's like the sacred romancer of our souls, that where he purchases his beloved by giving his life in behalf of her, and then protects and provides and pursues.
Well, the thing about pursuit is interesting. You've talked about it earlier in our conversation. Um, he instructs Adam and Eve, but as soon as they sin, they hide, but he comes to the garden after them. Cain, before he sins, God comes to him in order to protect him and prepare him. After Cain sins, he comes to him. The sinning society always gets the prophets. God is the great pursuer of humankind, but he also enlists us to be part of his pursuit by enlisting us to go after others. So you have Edmund, who sins in Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe. I don't know about you, Ken. I think if I was going to betray my siblings, I would have held out for chocolate rather than Turkish Delight.
Yeah, Turkish Delight never did it for me.
Me either. But Edmund is restored. So then you get to the Voyage of the Dawn Treader. There once was a boy named Eustace Clarence Scrubb, and he almost
deserved it. Yeah.
He has the heart of a dragon under the skin of a boy. And in the magic of that world, he's turned into a dragon. And when he's finally restored by Aslan, he comes back to the party of the Dawn Treader. And in the wee dawn moments, there's one person there to play father confessor to him. Who is it? Edmund, the one who himself had been redeemed. And now he's able to restore Eustace. Then in the silver chair, Eustace is sent back to Narnia to go after Prince Rilian, the son of King Caspian, who's been captured under the spell of the Green Witch. And I think Lewis really understands that the whole thing is about reproducing reproducers. One encounters Aslan, and that's transformative to a degree, but it's not completely transformative until we enter into the process of being a person who could be used of God to restore others to himself.
I think that's correct. That it's the wounded healer, and the idea of him pursuing us, underwriting our cost, redeeming us, and then bringing us to the end of ourselves and undragoning us, because we cannot do it ourselves. I've often thought of that imagery of trying to take it off yourself as comparable with the judgment seat of Christ, where we cannot, the flesh, this thing we call the flesh that Paul describes in Romans 7, can neither be removed nor improved. Only God can do that, and that's going to be when we stand before him and see his unendurable holiness, but then we become conformed to that image in fullness. But he burns away the wood, hay, and stubble, and that which is done in the power of the Spirit, and then as we abide in Christ and trust the Father, will endure. So this lovely idea, but it's terrifying. I'm terrified of it, but longing for it. As I like to say, it's easy to lip sync in the chorus of life, but each of us is going to have to sing solo before Jesus.
But there's something intriguing about it. You know, I do agree with you. There's a terrifying feature. And the terrifying feature is because we know enough about ourselves to be terrified of our sin before the holy God.
Yes.
But then there's also that side where if we think further, he is a holy God, but he is a loving God who pursues. He's a loving God who forgives. And there's something, too, about the desire to be in his presence in order that we might tear away the garbage. I don't know about you. I cannot wait for the day when my propensity to sin will finally be eradicated.
I love the thought of it. And I've been thinking a lot more about heaven as I'm getting older, and because age conspires with God, after all, it's a conspiracy, I tell you, to transfer our hope from the temporal to the eternal. We have no choice. But
I'm gonna steal that comment.
Yeah. Feel free. Yeah, it is a divine conspiracy in that respect, and but it draws us to the realities of this world. And I find that people are clinging so desperately to this world. They want to have a few more days, want to cling to this world. At the end of the day, though, he's inviting us. No, you're in a soul-forming world. You're in a second womb. You were never meant to stay here any more than you were meant to stay in your first world, womb world. You were being prepared for bios in your in womb world. In this world, it's your zoe, it's your spiritual life. And what we call death is what I call a second birth canal. And so when we're birthed into, but it's when I'm in His presence, immediately I think of the holiness of God and the sinfulness of sin, and that disparity then is overwhelmed by His removal of all that is wood, hay, and stubble, and then enduring, and then I can't think sin, and I love that idea.
Yeah. When I think about heaven, I think the first thing I want to do is just gawk at Jesus for the first 1,000 years or so.
Yeah, gawk.
What is it that you want to do second when you get to heaven? What is it?
You're talking about me?
Yeah, I'm asking you the question.
Oh, yeah.
Everybody wants to see Jesus first, I think. But what is it that you want to do second? What are you looking forward to when you get there?
Well, I see it as the enhancement of all that I have loved in this world, of people that I've loved, and having a capacity now, because there's no death and pain and sorrow and suffering and sin, to be able to be connected with people from the beginning to the end.
More deeply, to be connected more deeply,
more intimately with others. And so, as I see it, this whole idea of, I think that because of the sorrow, suffering, and disease and death and so forth, that we have no capacity for those things, that the possibilities of growth and intimacy in the heavenly places will be vastly increased in resurrected bodies, where we can't think sin, where we will be able to be connected with people from all generations, because then all of a sudden there's no pain, sorrow, and suffering. If I were connected with people wider than I am, I would not be able to endure it right now. I don't know how God endures that, but because He sees the end and sees the whole.
The idea of to know as we are known.
To know as we are known, yeah.
But there's another thing too. You know, we know that we have these different spectrums of color, and we see, and we know that beyond it there's an ultraviolet and an infrared. I can't help but wonder if we're not going to have maybe 32 different colors that we'll see in heaven. And we know we have 5 senses, you know, touch, taste, smell, hearing, and sight. What if we have 30 different inputs for sensory perception? What if our earlobes give us something, or our eyebrows and nose hairs give us something? And all of a sudden, what we're going to see, you know, the passage where Paul says, I know a man, whether in the body or out of the body, I don't know. He was taken up into the higher heavens, and he saw things that inexpressible delight. He couldn't talk about them even. Is there going to be more than we have the capacity? And I think there must be. There must be.
Oh, I think so. I think those patches of godlight in the woodlands of our experience of beauty, intimacy, and adventure are exemplars of that. I came up with a list of 40 pleasures of this world, and it's an interesting thing because you just mentioned 5 of them. I believe all our senses will be enhanced, and that we will be able to see perhaps into the infrared or ultraviolet in ways that we couldn't have seen before. So that means that you'll have new primary colors, because it'd be like trying to define blue to a person born blind. So yet that's what's going to be. Think of the sound. I think about the acuity, for example, of this Canadian owl that can soar about 100 feet above the snow, listening for the movement of a vole underneath the snow. Now, what is our sound going to be like? What is your taste, the best meal you've ever enjoyed, the best sumptuous touch, and the smell? All of those amplified in new realms that we haven't even begun to imagine. So I look at the pleasures of this world, and there's so many in abundance, and I begin to realize my word. We even in this world see unity, diversity, majesty, transcendence, and grace. And so I'm doing a lot of imagination about heaven. I find myself doing a lot, and I want people to become so desirous of that for me to live as Christ and to die as gain. And to realize that is my ultimate hope. So imagining being in a resurrected body where our capacity will be vastly enhanced, and our the not only our capacities and enhance. I think our pleasures will be greater too. I think one of the things we lost besides longevity was cognition, and then third, pleasure. We can't even manage them at 1,000 removes. All of these will be returned and restored, but then you'll not be able to think sin. And I love that. And then I'm in a quite creative context in which even the laws of physics will be doxological, not fallen, so that time will be a pool that I'll luxuriate and swim in rather than taking my life away, and space will be my agency. So that what will that be like as we can we'll go and zoom down orders of magnitude together and look into a hibiscus or whatever it's got, and then zoom back out. What a ride! So if it's not that, it'll be better, because I have a. So I've been doing a lot of thinking about the age to come.
Well, I think too there will be a continuity of consciousness.
Yes.
So we'll find that we were looking through a straw, and the moment we pass from this life to the next, all of a sudden it becomes a funnel.
A funnel.
And I can't wait.
I can't wait. Yeah, the possibilities are so rich and boundless that I've been doing a lot of imagination and thinking about what that'll be like. Yeah, it's
the concept of childlike faith too. That while there's a lot we don't understand, we believe because we trust the one who has us in his hand.
Yes, yes. So having that capacity, not being able to think sin, and I wonder, it's George MacDonald in Diary of an Old Soul, who talks about where he says, "Come, I would show you a thing," and he talks about a purple sunset that he had seen as a youth, and apparently being able to share it with another person. And I was wondering what your thoughts are about this. If it's true that after the judgment seat of Christ, I won't be able to think sin, and all of that will be done now and seen. Why the sins of the past can't blackmail the joy of the present and the future. Then it would mean possibly that I could enter into another person's soul and have a connection there in such a way that I could see through in their lives and they in mine, because there's nothing to hide, and being able to see that, I would be able to see life from an entirely different vantage point. And
I don't know if we're going to lose individuality though.
No.
So
no.
Rather than say seeing into another person's soul, that's interesting. I think that we could listen to their description of what's going on in their own mind and heart without trying to compromise what we hear to self-interest.
Yeah.
We totally attend to that person.
Yeah.
Benefit from that perspective.
Yeah.
And that enriches my soul.
At least that idea of being able for them to see a thing that I saw, and maybe see it from a different angle, but without an absorption at all, but rather an I-thou relationship. But it's like when I see a film with my wife, we see it stereoscopically, because we have a stereoscopic cognition in which she'll see it from one angle, I see it from another. It gives us depth of field as we collectively put that together. So in some way, it's an I-thou combination where the total is greater than the sum of the parts.
In the Four Loves, Lewis talks about friendship, and he says the first friend is a person who reads all the same books you read and gets the same thing out of them. That means you're not crazy. Other people have seen what you've seen.
Yeah.
The second friend reads all the same books you've read, but they get something different out of it. So that's a theological friend. They invite me into the conversation that broadens my understanding. And then he says, third, you have a community of friends like he had with the Inklings, where then they brought this stereoscope, or even more so, it's high fidelity. I'm benefiting from the insights and benefits of others. And if we read history right, we should not only be benefiting from people of our own time, but people of past time too, because there's perspective that we could gain there. I sometimes think we lose perspective because we're so stuck in our own time.
I think that's correct. We become just chronological snobbery. Again, Lewis talks about that, and you're stuck in your time, and then absolutizing that time.
If we describe other times, he talks about periodizing. So the lines that we draw in history are not lines that were actually drawn there. Bruce Edwards, who was a great C.S. Lewis scholar, he's since passed away, but he said that he thought the whole academic enterprise is to see patterns and exceptions. The patterns make it possible for me to abstract and pass on a body of knowledge. Without the exceptions, the patterns become false. So there's nobody running around in the Middle Ages saying, we live in the Middle Ages. That's just not true. But you have it, though, right now with people running around. They're convinced that we're living in the last days. I believe that we're closer to the last days, whatever they'll be, than we've been before. But Lewis always tried in times of crisis, World War II, the atomic age. He saw all these things as bad, and he said, but history has always been lived on a precipice of some level, either the Black Plague in the Middle Ages or a Viking horde coming in and slashing your throat. People have always been living that way. The question is, how should we be living now? Death is total in every generation. All people are going to die and so on. War does not increase death, aging, diseases, and so on.
Yeah.
In the midst of all of this, we can't wait till things are perfect before we press on to what I would say is faithful obedience.
Yes.
What I would say is living our full humanity in the midst of time.
Yes. Living the fullness of this present moment, and realizing that no matter what your view, we are definitely in our last days. So you and I are, in all that we encounter, are living in our last days. And so living with that in mind, but living with an anticipation of the glory to come is, to me, a great way to redeem the time. I think, again, Lewis's idea of those who are most heavenly minded do actually the most earthly good, not the other way around. Yeah. And I think that makes perfect sense. I think about this world, and I'm using this metaphor from science of the butterfly cycle, where it goes from the eggs to the larva, which are the caterpillars in different stages of caterpillars, and then you have the pupa, and with a moth it becomes a cocoon. With a butterfly, it becomes a chrysalis, and then it liquefies and forms its own actual burial chamber, liquefies into a goo, and that odd-looking leaf-munching creature we call a caterpillar emerges as a nectar-drinking flying wonder. And so that analogy I'm using now is that of the idea of we are in our current bodies, I think, compared or like caterpillars in comparison to the butterfly to come. And I know I know the butterfly, but I haven't seen him yet. But we will be made like him. And
the scriptures support you in that. Romans 12, 1 and 2.
Yes.
Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed. The word for transform there is metamorphose.
Yes.
Metamorphosis.
So it's the best example I can think of. So that, and I think we're in a caterpillar cosmos as well. So, but wait till we see all things being so. But my problem is I have a caterpillar imagination. That's a consequence. But I can see that the best things that we've seen, the best or hints of better goods to come. And I think that's really the way of looking at it. So it's rich.
We see through a glass darkly, right?
Yeah, but then face to face. Well, I've enjoyed our time together. I don't want to take more of your time, but it's been grand to be with you.
Thank you. I look forward to seeing you in February too.
Yes, it's going to be at the Museum of the Bible, and we're Beauty in the Arts, and that's going to be a great event. We're going to be having.
It'll be fun studying up too. And then do me a favor and greet our mutual friend, Steve Urban, for me.
I will do so. Yes, that's right. You know Steve. I'll tell him that. Yeah, I'm hoping to have a conversation with Vincent Sieber, by the way, on the because we created, Stephen and I think you know this, a guidebook to the Mere Christianity, and so I'm seeking to get the approval for us to print that, or maybe even for them to look at it.
That'll be great.
Yeah, it'd be great to do.
Well, I look forward to seeing you again. I enjoyed this conversation.
Yeah,
you opened my eyes to see things.
Thank you, my friend. You always are enrich my imagination as well. So I thank you. We're going to have a great time in ageless splendor, representing all ages at once. Maybe you and I will be like a couple of 8-year-old kids, kind of playing at the fields of God, and then calling into being new things as gardeners of the new order of creation, which I like very much.
One comment on that. One comment on that. What was the name of your second grade teacher? What was her name?
Oh, my second grade teacher. No, I
Yeah.
can't remember. No,
Can you remember who your best friend was in second grade?
I did. Yeah, yeah. Freddie. No, Russell Smith. Yeah, but I don't remember the teacher though. Yeah,
What was the name of the school?
it was Grant School.
In your mind's eye, can you see anything on the bulletin board in the classroom?
Well, from that school, yeah, there were some images up above that I used to imagine, and they took me to faraway places. Some photographs that I can still remember that, but I had a problem. I had what they would call ADHD now, but I couldn't pay attention.
I have that too. But when was the last time you thought about second grade?
I think I've been thinking about some youth. Actually, it's not that long for me because I'm remembering a dream I had when I was in second grade of infinity, of the number one getting huger and huger, and I woke up in terror. But I remember I was just thinking about that second grade, and when I learned the word "ignore him," when I took Dagmar's her braid and tried to pull on it, and she said, "Ignore him." And I still remember the games in the field outside there. I have hundreds of memories before I was 8 years old, before we moved from Dumont, New Jersey. Why are you asking these good questions? These
Because as infrequently as we think about second grade, we can recall some things.
It's amazing.
We'll be able to recall it with greater clarity. But I think this whole life, when we get to heaven, will be like our memories of second grade now.
Yeah. I think that's right. Yeah.
Boys to come will they won't eclipse, but they will so transcend.
Yeah.
The realities that we'll be encountering.
And what I loved in those days, and what it summons up in my mind's eye are hints of better goods even that I can name.
Yeah.
Hints of greater goods to come.
Thank you, Ken, very much.
God bless you, Richard. We'll see you in February.
Thank you for being a part of the Explorers podcast. Please like and subscribe, and we'll see you next time.